The rain had stopped just in time for the Blackwood mansion to gleam under the afternoon sun. Atlanta's most exclusive estate stood like a monument to old money and quiet power, its manicured gardens whispering of secrets only wealth could buy. Inside, polished marble floors reflected the gold-trimmed walls, and the faint scent of magnolia drifted through the open French doors. David Blackwood stood in the library, one hand resting on the back of the leather armchair where his daughter sat. His tailored suit fit like it had been sewn onto him, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a weight no wealth could ease. Emma, just 7 years old, dangled her legs off the chair, her small shoes tapping the wood in a rhythm that matched the beat of his hesitation. She clutched a faded teddy bear to her chest, the one her late mother had given her on her 5th birthday. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice low but steady, "I've been thinking. It might be time to find someone who can be a new mom for you." Emma's head turned sharply, her wide eyes searching his face. "A new mom?" she whispered, as if saying it too loudly might erase the memory of the one she'd lost. David knelt beside her, taking her free hand. "Not to replace your mom. No one could do that. But maybe someone who can help take care of you. Someone who can make this house feel less empty." Emma's gaze drifted toward the fireplace where a framed photo of her mother smiled down at them. "Do I get to choose her?" she asked, almost challengingly. David's lips curved into a faint smile. "Yes. You will meet 5 women. They'll stay here for a month. At the end, you'll tell me which one you'd like to be your new mom." In truth, it hadn't been his idea. His therapist had suggested it after Emma's nightmares returned, an unconventional way to let the child feel in control of a change she feared. David had agreed reluctantly, telling himself it was for Emma's healing, not his own loneliness. That evening, the mansion's grand entrance came alive with the arrival of the 5 candidates. First came Victoria Ashworth, a statuesque socialite in a sapphire gown, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier's light. Her smile was polished, perfect, and utterly hollow. Next was Priscilla Montgomery, a corporate lawyer whose handshake was as firm as her gaze, assessing, measuring, already deciding what she thought of everyone in the room. Christina Hawthorne, a dermatologist to Atlanta's elite, floated in with the effortless grace of someone accustomed to being admired. Her perfume lingered in the air like a calculated afterthought. Rebecca Sterling, the architect, carried a portfolio under her arm as if her blueprints could serve as proof of her worth. Her eyes scanned the room with the precision of a surveyor. And finally, Amanda Chase, hotel heiress, breezed in with a laugh that was just a little too loud, her designer luggage rolling behind her like an entourage of one. Emma stood half-hidden behind her father, offering polite hellos. None of the women noticed the way her eyes kept drifting toward the far end of the hall. There, partially obscured by the carved mahogany doorway, was Keisha Williams. She wore a crisp maid's uniform, a white headband keeping her curls neatly back, her hands wrapped around a silver tray. She wasn't watching the guests, she was watching Emma. And when their eyes met, she gave the smallest, warmest smile. It lasted only a second, but it was enough for Emma to feel it, a quiet kindness in a house now filled with noise. David didn't notice. The 5 women didn't care. But Emma did. And in that moment, without knowing it, she had already taken her first step toward a choice that would change everything. The next morning, the mansion woke under the hum of polite conversation and the clink of porcelain china. Breakfast was served in the sunroom, a room awash with soft gold light spilling through tall glass windows, the garden outside glistening from last night's rain. The 5 women sat around the oval table, each dressed as if this were a magazine shoot instead of a casual morning. Victoria Ashworth's silk blouse shimmered with every movement. Priscilla Montgomery scrolled through her phone between sips of coffee, her brow furrowed in perpetual judgment. Christina Hawthorne ran a manicured hand over her sleek hair while Rebecca Sterling unfolded a newspaper, pretending disinterest. Amanda Chase stirred her cappuccino as if it were a calculated performance. Emma entered quietly, clutching her teddy bear, and slid into the seat beside her father. Her eyes, however, scanned the room for someone else. She found Keisha in the corner, arranging a plate of fresh fruit. Keisha's uniform was crisp, but her demeanor was unassuming. She moved with the kind of quiet efficiency that didn't demand attention yet somehow drew it. She placed a plate in front of Emma, sliced strawberries shaped into a heart. Emma's face lit up. "You remembered," she said softly. "Of course I did," Keisha replied with a gentle smile. "Strawberries always taste better in the morning, don't they?" It was an innocent moment, but the air shifted. Victoria's gaze flickered from Emma to Keisha, a tiny curl of disapproval forming on her lips. Priscilla's eyes narrowed and Amanda exchanged a knowing glance with Christina. It wasn't that they felt threatened, not yet, but the unspoken hierarchy of the room had been unsettled. "So," Victoria began, her voice dripping with social poise, "Emma, what did you think of our first night here? Did you enjoy the company?" Emma hesitated, looking at the women, then at Kez. It was okay," she murmured, picking up a strawberry. Priscilla leaned in with a lawyer's precision. "You know, Emma, over the next few weeks, you'll have a chance to spend time with each of us. We can do all kinds of things. Trips to the museum, horseback riding, even spa days if you like." Keisha turned slightly, busying herself with the coffee service, but her ears caught every word. "That sounds nice," Emma said politely, though her voice lacked enthusiasm. She glanced toward Keisha again. David noticed the glance. He said nothing, but the way his daughter sought out the maid's quiet presence lingered in his mind. After breakfast, the candidates gathered in the sitting room to discuss bonding activities with Emma. Keisha remained in the background, dusting shelves, her movements deliberate and calm. She heard snippets of conversation. She needs to learn refinement. Someone she can look up to socially. And let's be honest, the help should stay in the background. Keisha didn't flinch. She'd heard it all before. The words slid over her like rain on glass. But deep inside, a quiet understanding settled in. They saw her as invisible, and that invisibility could be her greatest weapon. When Emma slipped into the room, Keisha was the first to notice. She crouched to tie the little girl's shoelace, their eyes meeting with an unspoken trust. In that instant, Emma felt safer with her than with anyone else in the house. The women kept talking, unaware that in the silence between the child and the maid, something was already being built, something no amount of wealth or status could compete with. By the third day, the Blackwood mansion had settled into a strange rhythm. Morning smiles, afternoon activities, and evening conversations that felt more like interviews than genuine exchanges. But beneath the polished civility, something darker began to take root. Emma was seated on the plush cream sofa in the drawing room, coloring in a book Keisha had quietly slipped her the night before. A book filled with scenes of gardens and animals instead of the pageant-like princesses the candidates had been showering her with. Keisha dusted the fireplace mantel nearby, moving with unhurried precision. Victoria entered first, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She eyed the coloring book, lips curling into a patronizing smile. "Emma, darling, wouldn't you prefer something a bit more sophisticated? You're going to be a young lady soon." Emma shook her head, not looking up. "I like this one. Keisha gave it to me." That last part was like striking a match. Christina, who had followed Victoria in, exchanged a glance with her. "Keisha, dear," Christina said with syrupy sweetness, "perhaps it's best to leave the child's education to those of us who understand what she needs socially." Keisha didn't look up from the mantel. "Of course, ma'am. I just thought she might enjoy drawing what she sees in the garden." "Gardens are for staff to maintain, not for children to obsess over," Rebecca added, stepping in with a rolled-up set of architectural plans under her arm. Emma's brow furrowed. "Why not? My mom used to take me into the garden all the time." Silence. The mention of her late mother landed like a heavy stone. Even David, standing discreetly in the doorway, felt the shift. The candidates quickly recovered, redirecting the conversation to their plans for the day. They had arranged a tea etiquette lesson for Emma in the formal dining room, a chance, as Priscilla put it, to teach her the manners befitting her place in society. Keisha served the tea without a word, pouring for each woman before placing a cup in front of Emma. The china looked fragile in the child's small hands. She sipped politely, then whispered to Keisha, "It tastes like flowers." "It's chamomile," Keisha murmured back with a smile. "Good for calming the heart." The smile faded when she noticed Victoria watching them with a calculating expression. Later that afternoon, Emma went to the kitchen looking for Keisha. She found her wiping down the counters, humming softly. "Can we make cookies?" Emma asked. Keisha glanced toward the hallway, listening for the click of heels. "Of course, sweet pea. Let's do butterflies like last time." They were halfway through shaping the dough when Amanda appeared in the doorway. Her tone was light, but her words were edged. "Emma, shouldn't you be upstairs? We're planning tomorrow's outing to the art gallery." Emma hesitated. "But I'm baking with Keisha." Amanda's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Sweetheart, you'll have plenty of time with staff. Right now we have important things to plan." Emma's face fell, but she followed Amanda out. Keisha stayed still for a moment, the warm kitchen suddenly feeling cold. What Keisha didn't know was that David had been in his study, watching the entire scene unfold on the discreet security feed. His jaw tightened. This wasn't just social snobbery anymore, it was the first hint of deliberate exclusion. And he was starting to realize his daughter's choice might not just be about affection, it might be about survival. The rain that night fell in slow, steady sheets pattering against the mansion's tall windows. By morning, the garden was dripping with silver droplets, and the air carried that fresh, almost fragile scent that comes after a storm. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but clean. Breakfast began without David. He was on an early conference call upstairs. The 5 women took their usual places at the table, their conversations hushed, their smiles a little too deliberate. Emma wandered in, rubbing sleep from her eyes, still in her flannel pajamas. Keisha was already there, pouring orange juice into a crystal glass for the little girl. "Morning, sunshine," she said softly, sliding the glass toward her. Emma smiled, climbing onto the chair next to Keisha's station near the sideboard rather than at the main table. The gesture did not go unnoticed. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Emma, sweetheart," she said in a tone as smooth as the silk scarf around her neck. "Don't you want to sit with us? It's not polite to eat with the staff." Emma froze mid-sip. "But I like sitting here." Rebecca chimed in, folding her napkin neatly. "You'll have plenty of time with Keisha after breakfast. This is family time." Keisha didn't speak. She simply placed a small plate of toast and berries in front of Emma. "Eat wherever you feel most comfortable, honey," she said quietly. That simple permission seemed to unsettle the women more than if Keisha had argued. They exchanged glances, quick silent signals passed like cards in a high-stakes game. By mid-morning, the day's activity was underway. The women had planned a cultural enrichment outing to the Atlanta History Center, complete with a private guide. Emma, however, had slipped into the kitchen where Keisha was rolling out dough for an apple pie. "I don't want to go," Emma whispered. "They just talk about themselves the whole time. And they don't listen." Keisha knelt, brushing a stray curl from the girl's face. "Sometimes you have to go along with things, even if they're boring. But when you get back, we'll make this pie together. Deal?" Emma nodded reluctantly. They didn't realize Amanda had been lingering just beyond the doorway, her expression hard. Later that afternoon, the sabotage began. Quiet, calculated, and aimed directly at Keisha. A misplaced set of keys. A spill in the hallway that she was blamed for leaving unattended. A vase of lilies placed on the counter she had just cleaned, with the accusation that she'd forgotten them there, causing the petals to drop. The cruelest move came at dinner. Emma's favorite sketchbook, a gift from Keisha, had gone missing. Victoria found it in the supply closet near Keisha's room. Emma's cheeks flushed. "Keisha, why would you put it there?" "I didn't, sweet pea," Keisha said calmly, but her heart clenched at the confusion in the child's eyes. At the far end of the table, David set down his fork, his gaze sweeping over each candidate. He didn't speak, not yet, but the cameras had caught every angle, every staged discovery, every false smile hiding the glee of sabotage. He was beginning to understand that what was unfolding here wasn't just about choosing a new mother, it was about protecting his daughter from the quiet cruelty of those who wore charm like armor, and Keisha, whether she knew it or not, had already stepped into the role of protector. By the next morning, the tension in the Blackwood mansion felt like it could be sliced with the silver bread knife laid neatly on the breakfast table. Emma came downstairs still wearing the butterfly hair clip Keisha had given her last week. It was bright yellow, cheerful, completely out of place among the muted tones of the dining room. She walked straight past the line of smiling candidates and into the kitchen, where Keisha was arranging a plate of pancakes shaped like little hearts. "Morning, sweet pea," Keisha said, her voice warm enough to melt the butter on the plate. "Morning," Emma replied, hugging her waist. From the dining room, Victoria's voice rang out, sharp and faux playful. "Emma, come sit with us. You'll spoil your appetite eating in the kitchen like that." Emma glanced back but didn't move. "I like it here." The remark hit like a pebble tossed into still water. Ripples of irritation spread across the table. Priscilla raised a brow. Christina gave a thin smile. Amanda tapped her manicured nails against her teacup, each tap a tiny note of disdain. Emma took her pancakes to the table, but instead of sitting between any of the women, she dragged her chair next to Keisha's small side table. "You can sit with me," she told her. Keisha shook her head gently. "I'll just be right here if you need anything." Emma frowned. "But you're my friend." The word friend seemed to stick in the air like smoke. Victoria's fork paused midair. "Emma, darling, the help is here to work, not to socialize." The room went cold. Emma looked straight at her, small but unshaken. "Keisha helps me more than anyone here." The silence was absolute. Even the clock on the mantel seemed to stop ticking. David had been watching from the archway, unnoticed. He caught Keisha's quick, pleading glance, asking without words not to make this worse for Emma. He said nothing, but inside things shifted. His daughter wasn't just attached to Keisha, she was choosing her, even in the face of subtle intimidation. That afternoon, David called his assistant and gave a quiet order. "Pull records on all 5 women, everything, public, private, financial, anything you can get without breaking the law." While the candidates took Emma on another enrichment outing, Keisha stayed behind to prepare dinner. She moved through the kitchen with methodical grace, unaware that David had stepped in behind her. "She's defending you now," he said quietly. Keisha looked up, startled. "She shouldn't have to." "But she is," David replied. "And I think it's because you've been giving her something they can't." Keisha didn't ask what he meant. She just went back to kneading dough, her hands steady, but her mind already bracing for whatever was coming next. Upstairs, the 5 women returned from their outing, all smiles for David, but throwing each other knowing glances. They thought they were tightening the noose. They had no idea he was already unraveling it. The next day began like any other, at least that's how the women wanted it to look. Sunlight spilled across the marble floors of the Blackwood mansion, gilding everything it touched. Fresh lilies stood in a crystal vase on the dining table, their scent rich and cloying. But beneath the glossy perfection, there was movement, a quiet, deliberate positioning of pieces on a board that none of them realized David was now controlling. He had spent the night reviewing camera footage, pausing, rewinding, and saving clips into a private folder. Every glance, every whispered exchange, every accidental mishap Keisha had been blamed for was now documented in crystal clarity. This morning, he had instructed his security team to discreetly reposition 2 additional cameras, one in the hallway outside the kitchen and one in the butler's pantry. It didn't take long for them to catch something. Keisha was in the laundry room folding Emma's favorite pink blanket, humming softly. In the dining room, Victoria and Amanda lingered near the staircase. The cameras caught Amanda slipping Emma's stuffed rabbit, a toy Keisha had mended the week before, into the bottom drawer of Keisha's small side cabinet. Minutes later, Emma came downstairs looking for it. "Bunny's gone," she said, eyes wide. "I saw Keisha near the laundry," Victoria said lightly. "Maybe she put it somewhere safe." It was an expertly staged moment, but David was already watching from his office monitor. He saw Keisha's puzzled expression when they found the rabbit in her things. Emma's lip trembled. "Keisha, why'd you hide it?" "I didn't, sweet pea," Keisha said gently, kneeling to meet her gaze. "Sometimes things end up in the wrong place, but I promise, I didn't take him." Victoria's hand rested on Emma's shoulder. "It's all right, darling. We'll just have to remember that not everyone understands boundaries." David's jaw tightened. He could see Emma's confusion, the trust in her eyes wavering, not in Keisha, but in the world around her. That was the breaking point. After dinner, when the women retreated to the library for brandy and their own whispered conference, David called Keisha into his study. She stood in the doorway, uncertain. "I know what they're doing," he said. Her breath caught. "You do?" "I've been watching. Everything. And from now on, I'm not just watching. I'm building a case." Keisha's eyes searched his, looking for any hint of pity. There was none. Just a steady resolve. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I need you to keep being yourself," he said. "Kind, patient. Let them think they're winning. They'll write their own ending." She nodded slowly, but inside her pulse was hammering. For the first time since the women had turned on her, she knew she wasn't alone. Upstairs, the 5 candidates laughed in low tones, unaware that every word, every scheme was being captured, and that the man they were trying to manipulate was already planning their public undoing. It happened on a rainy Thursday, the kind of day where the skies seemed to press down on the Blackwood mansion, dimming the light in every room. The patter of rain on the glass roof of the conservatory was soft but constant, like an unending whisper. Emma was curled up in the reading nook, clutching her scuffed storybook while the 5 women gathered in the adjacent drawing room. They thought she was too absorbed in her book to notice. They were wrong. Victoria's voice, low and dripping with disdain, cut through the air. "I don't care how sweet she acts, she's a cleaner. Emma needs to understand that women like Keisha are not role models for her future." Priscilla gave a short laugh. "Future? Please! If David marries her, the girl's social life will be finished before it begins." Amanda's voice slid in, syrupy but sharp. "She's already too attached. We'll have to make her see Keisha's flaws, or invent them if we have to." Christina leaned closer to the others. "She's vulnerable. Just plant the right ideas in her head, about stealing, about lying, and she'll start to doubt her precious nanny." Rebecca, quieter than the rest, still couldn't resist. "Children need boundaries. This one is spoiled, thinking she can choose her own stepmother. We'll show her her place." Emma froze, her small fingers tightening around the edges of the book. She didn't fully understand every word, but she understood enough. They wanted Keisha gone, and they didn't like her. She slipped off the cushioned bench and padded silently down the hall toward her father's study. He was on a call, but the moment she appeared in the doorway with wide, tear-brimmed eyes, he ended it. "Daddy," she whispered, climbing into his lap. "Why don't they like Keisha?" David stilled. "Who, sweetheart?" "The fancy ladies. They said she's not good enough to be my mom. They said they'll make me think bad things about her, so I don't like her anymore." For a heartbeat, there was no sound except the rain. David felt something deep inside him harden into steel. Emma's words weren't the naive misunderstandings of a child. He recognized the truth in her tone, the hurt in her voice. "Did they say that to you?" he asked, his voice even, but colder than the rain outside. Emma shook her head. "They said it to each other, but they didn't know I was there." She hesitated, then added, "Daddy, I don't want any of them to be my mom. I want Keisha." David hugged her tightly, resting his chin on her hair. "Don't you worry, my girl. You'll never have to choose someone who doesn't love you the right way." Upstairs, the women clinked glasses, certain they were tightening their grip on the game. In reality, they had just handed him the proof he needed, straight from the mouth of the only person whose opinion mattered. That night, the storm outside finally broke into a gentle drizzle, but inside the mansion, tension still hung thick in the air. David sat in his study, a tumbler of untouched whiskey on the desk before him. He had replayed Emma's words in his mind 100 times since she'd gone to bed, each repetition sharpening his anger into something cold, precise. When Keisha knocked softly at the door, he already knew why she had come. She stepped in wearing her simple house uniform, her hair tied back, her face calm but watchful. She always seemed to sense when something was wrong. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her voice soft. "Emma told me she heard something today. She wouldn't tell me exactly what, but—" David gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit, Keisha. There's no need for Mr. Blackwood tonight." She hesitated, then sat, folding her hands in her lap. He studied her in the lamplight, the way her eyes held steady despite the undercurrent of uncertainty. "They talked about you," he said finally. "The 5 women. They think if they plant the right ideas in Emma's mind, they can turn her against you." Keisha's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't ask who they were, she already knew. "And Emma heard this herself?" "She did, and she told me exactly what they said." For a moment, Keisha looked down, her lashes casting shadows across her cheeks. Then she lifted her head and met his eyes. "I've seen this before. I've heard this before. My mother worked 30 years for a family who smiled to her face and plotted behind her back. I promised myself I'd never let it break me." "It won't," David said firmly, "because this time, they're the ones walking into a trap." Keisha tilted her head, curiosity flickering behind her calm expression. "What kind of trap?" David leaned forward, his voice low. "One they'll set for themselves. I've got every word they've said on video, every petty sabotage. But words alone aren't enough. They need to reveal who they really are openly, without a shadow of doubt. And they will. Because I'm going to let them think they're winning." A slow, almost dangerous smile tugged at the corner of Keisha's lips. "You want me to keep playing my part?" "Exactly. Be the Keisha they think they can push around. Be too kind, too patient. Let them underestimate you." She sat back in the chair, her shoulders straightening. "I can do that, but Mr. David..." She corrected herself at his earlier request. "When the time comes, I want to be in the room when the truth comes out." "You will be," he promised. "And so will Emma." Keisha's gaze softened. She deserves to see what happens when people try to destroy others out of hate. Outside, the rain tapped softly on the window, like a quiet metronome counting down to the inevitable. Upstairs, the 5 women slept soundly, convinced they were tightening their hold on the game. Neither of them knew that the real game had already shifted, and that the Blackwood mansion itself had become the stage for their own undoing. The next morning dawned deceptively bright, as if the mansion itself wanted to hide the storm that was brewing inside. The marble halls glistened from the early sun, and fresh flowers filled crystal vases in the dining room. Everything looked perfect, until you looked closely. Emma came down for breakfast, rubbing her sleepy eyes, and immediately froze. Her favorite stuffed bunny, the one her late mother had given her on her 5th birthday, was lying on the table, with one ear torn clean off. She stared at it as though someone had just ripped out a piece of her heart. "Oh dear," Victoria cooed, rising from her seat with an exaggerated gasp. "How on earth did that happen?" Amanda leaned over, feigning concern. "I saw it in the laundry room yesterday. Perhaps someone wasn't careful with it." Christina sipped her coffee. "Or perhaps someone shouldn't be playing with it while working," she said, her eyes flicking toward Keisha, who was quietly setting down a tray of freshly baked muffins. Emma's eyes darted to Keisha, wide and wounded. "Did you—" Her voice cracked before she could finish the question. Keisha didn't rush to defend herself. Instead, she crouched down so she was eye level with Emma. "Sweetheart, I would never hurt anything that belongs to you. You know that in your heart." The girl blinked, her lip trembling. "But how did it get like this?" Before Keisha could answer, Rebecca spoke, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Children need to learn that some people, especially staff, sometimes get too attached to things that aren't theirs." David, standing silently at the edge of the room, caught the flash of pain in Keisha's eyes. It was quick, gone in an instant, replaced by that same unshakable calm. "Emma," Keisha said softly, "why don't you sit with me in the kitchen for breakfast today? I made those butterfly pancakes you like." The girl hesitated, laze, oaking between the table of elegant women and Keisha's open, steady face. Then she slipped her small hand into Keisha's and followed her out, leaving the dining room heavy with an unspoken tension. When the kitchen door closed behind them, Victoria leaned back in her chair, a smug smile curling her lips. "You see how easy it is? Plant a little doubt and the child starts questioning her." Priscilla chuckled. "By the end of the week, Emma won't even want to be near her. Then we'll have David exactly where we want him." But what they didn't notice, what none of them noticed, was the small black device tucked into the base of the dining room chandelier. A camera. One of many. David hadn't just been watching. He'd been recording. Upstairs in his study, the feed showed every word, every smirk, every calculated glance. He leaned back in his chair, a cold satisfaction settling in his chest. They were digging their own graves, every moment captured in high definition. By mid-afternoon, the air in the mansion had shifted. The women moved through the halls with the poise of swans, their faces serene, but underneath was the rippling undercurrent of a power play. Emma sat on the thick rug in the sunroom, quietly arranging puzzle pieces. Her bunny, now stitched back together by Keisha's careful hands, rested beside her. She didn't look up when Victoria glided in, all perfume and silk. "Emma, darling," Victoria said sweetly, crouching down beside her. "Keisha's been telling you stories, hasn't she?" Emma glanced up, her small brow furrowing. "She tells me bedtime stories about her mom and when she was little." Victoria's smile tightened. "And that's sweet. But you need to understand, sometimes people tell stories to make themselves seem more important than they are. You have to be careful who you trust." Before Emma could reply, Christina swept in with a box in her hands. "Look what I brought you," she said, revealing an expensive porcelain tea set gleaming under the afternoon light. "Why don't we play with something a bit nicer than those old toys Keisha finds for you?" Emma's fingers hovered over the delicate cups, but she didn't touch them. She thought of the butterfly pancakes Keisha made, the way Keisha had sewn Bunny's ear back without being asked, and the warm way she always said sweetheart. "I like my toys," Emma said simply, returning to her puzzle. For a second, both women froze, neither used to being dismissed, especially not by a child. From the doorway, David's voice broke the moment. "Emma, could you come to my office for a minute?" She nodded, picking up Bunny and walking past the two women without a second glance. In David's study, Keisha was already there, standing by his desk. Emma climbed into her father's chair, swinging her legs, looking at both of them expectantly. "Keisha and I," David began, "were just talking about how smart you've been lately, how you've been paying attention to who's kind and who isn't." Emma's eyes brightened. "I know who's nice to me," she said, "and who just wants to win." David's gaze flicked to Keisha. There was something fierce in the way the maid looked at Emma, protective, but also proud. "Sweetheart," David said, lowering his voice, "I want you to keep being you. Don't let anyone tell you who to like or not like. Just notice things and remember them." Emma grinned as if she'd been given a secret mission. "Like a spy?" Keisha chuckled softly. "Exactly like a spy." From that day forward, Emma began watching. She noticed the quick glances the women gave each other when they thought she wasn't looking, the way their voices changed when Keisha entered the room, and how their smiles never reached their eyes when they spoke to her. And though she didn't know it, every little detail she observed was another thread in the net David was quietly weaving around the five women, one that would tighten when the time was right. It was raining the next morning, the kind of steady, whispering downpour that made the Blackwood mansion feel like it had been sealed off from the rest of the world. The women were gathered in the formal living room, their jewel-toned dresses standing out against the muted gray light spilling through the tall windows. Emma sat curled up in the corner of the sofa, sketching in her notebook, Keisha not far away, quietly dusting the bookshelves. Amanda, dressed in a deep emerald silk, glanced toward Victoria and gave a subtle nod. She stood crossing the room with a practiced elegance, holding a crystal glass in her hand. "Emma, sweetheart," she said warmly, "come try this juice I had imported from Italy. It's full of vitamins." Emma looked up from her drawing. "What's in it?" "Oh, just fruit," Amanda replied smoothly. "It's wonderful for brightening your skin and giving you energy." Keisha turned at that. Something in Amanda's tone set off a spark of unease in her chest. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Let me taste it first," she said, reaching for the glass. Amanda's smile faltered for a heartbeat, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, that's not necessary." "It is." David's voice cut through the air like a blade. He was standing in the doorway, his presence filling the room. He crossed the carpet in 3 strides, taking the glass from Amanda's hand. Keisha's right. Without breaking eye contact, David placed the glass on the mantel and said calmly, Amanda, I think you and I should have a private conversation in my office. Amanda's cheeks flushed, but she followed him out, the other women exchanging curious, uneasy glances. In the hallway, out of sight of the others, David's voice was low but cold. I know exactly what's going on here. That juice wasn't just fruit. Amanda blinked, feigning offense. David, that's ridiculous. Are you accusing me of... I'm accusing you, David interrupted, of intentionally trying to give my daughter something that could trigger her allergy. Did you think I didn't know she's allergic to pomegranate? Amanda's lips parted, but no words came. David leaned closer. You're not clever, Amanda. You're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. When he returned to the living room, Keisha was sitting beside Emma, her arm around the girl, who was still clutching her sketchbook. David looked at Keisha for a moment longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement that she had once again been the shield between his daughter and harm. The other women, sensing a shift, became quieter. For the first time, their confidence cracked. If David was starting to act, their game was no longer as safe as they thought. And in the shadows of the chandelier above them, the cameras kept rolling. Every word, every flicker of fear in their eyes, every desperate attempt, it was all being captured, ready to be played when the time came. The storm had passed by morning, but the air in the mansion still carried that heavy metallic stillness that follows a long night of rain. Emma was in the kitchen, perched on a stool, carefully shaping pancake batter into butterflies the way Keisha had taught her. The smell of vanilla and cinnamon drifted through the air, warm and comforting. Priscilla appeared in the doorway, her hair perfectly styled, her pearl earrings catching the light. She smiled at Emma, but it was the kind of smile that looked painted on. Good morning, sweetheart, she said, her voice smooth. Mind if I keep you company while you cook? Emma shrugged. Keisha's making them with me. I see that, Priscilla said, stepping closer. You know, Emma, I wanted to tell you something important about Keisha, something you should hear from me before you hear it from someone else. Keisha froze mid-pour, her instincts instantly on alert. She didn't look up, but every nerve in her body sharpened. Priscilla lowered her voice, glancing toward the hallway to make sure they were alone. Keisha isn't really supposed to be here, you know. People like her. They work for families like yours, but they don't belong. Your father, he's only keeping her here because she's your maid. But once he chooses your new mom, she'll be gone. Emma's small hands tightened around the wooden spoon. That's not true, she said firmly, her voice trembling but clear. Priscilla's smile thinned. It is true, darling. It's just the way things work. You'll understand when you're older. That was when Keisha finally looked up, setting the ladle down with deliberate care. Her voice was calm, too calm, but her eyes were steady. Emma, she said, sometimes people will tell you things to try to make you doubt what you know in your heart. But the truth isn't about what they say. It's about what you see, what you feel, and what you've lived. Emma turned in her seat, meeting Keisha's gaze. I see you every day. You take care of me. You make my bunny better. You stay with me when I have bad dreams. That's what I know. Priscilla's jaw tightened. Emma, David's voice came from the doorway, quiet but razor sharp. Priscilla, my office. Now. She froze. I've warned all of you once, he continued, his eyes like steel. You don't get to manipulate my daughter. And you don't get to decide who belongs in her life. Priscilla swallowed, her confidence faltering for the first time. She walked past him without a word, the click of her heels echoing down the marble hall. David stepped into the kitchen, resting a hand on Emma's shoulder, his gaze on Keisha. Thank you, he said softly. It was just 2 words, but they carried the weight of something bigger, a shift, an understanding that he wasn't just watching anymore. Keisha nodded once, her expression unreadable, but inside she knew something had changed. David wasn't just a silent observer now, he was stepping onto the field. By the time the sun dipped below the Atlanta skyline that evening, the Blackwood mansion felt like a pressure cooker. Every polite smile from the 5 women was stretched thin, hiding cracks that were beginning to show. They didn't know it yet, but David had already shifted the game. In his private study, a place none of the women dared to enter, David sat at his desk reviewing hours of recorded footage. The screen glowed in the dim light, showing Priscilla's condescending smile, Amanda's carefully staged juice incident, Victoria's whispered schemes. He took notes, precise and methodical, as if preparing for trial. Marcus Thompson, the investigator, leaned against the bookcase, arms crossed. "You've got enough here to ruin all of them in one afternoon," he said. "I'm not just looking to ruin them," David replied, eyes still on the screen. "I want the truth so undeniable, so airtight, that when I cut them out of Emma's life, no one will ever question why." Meanwhile, in the mansion's quiet guest annex, Kesha was engaged in her own form of preparation. The small desk in her room was covered in papers, Emma's school art projects, printed emails, a thick folder marked child development reports. On the phone, Professor Angela Morrison listened carefully as Kesha walked her through every incident, every subtle cruelty. "When this is over," Professor Morrison said, her voice steady, "you're not just going to have evidence, you're going to have a documented case study in psychological resilience. And Emma will have proof, in writing, that you were her safe place." Kesha smiled faintly. "That's the point. They can twist their words all they want, but they can't twist facts." Back in the main house, Victoria was gathering the other 4 women in the library, unaware that every word was being picked up by hidden microphones. "We're running out of time," she said, pacing in front of the fireplace. "David's been distracted lately. He's watching us. I can feel it." Amanda scoffed. "So? He's still a man. Flatter him enough and he'll forget whatever he thinks he saw." "No," Victoria snapped. "This isn't about charm anymore. It's about survival. Kesha is winning Emma over, and if that child says she wants the maid for a mother, we are all finished." Priscilla leaned forward. "Then we take it to the next level. No more subtle hints. We make her look dangerous." Kesha, in her room, sat back from her desk, listening to the live feed streaming from David's security system. Every sentence confirmed what she already knew. They were desperate now, and desperate people make mistakes. And somewhere deep inside, that quiet fire in her chest burned hotter, not just for herself, for Emma, for every time she'd watched someone like her mother be pushed out of a room she deserved to be in. The stage was set, the players were moving, and both Kesha and David were ready. They just had to wait for the right moment to close the trap. The morning began with a strange, brittle cheerfulness that clung to the mansion like static. The 5 women moved through the breakfast room as if on a stage, their voices a touch too bright, their smiles a shade too fixed. Kesha felt it the moment she stepped in with Emma's plate of pancakes. There was something planned for today. Victoria poured herself a second cup of coffee, glancing at the others with the subtlest nod. "Emma, sweetheart," she began, her voice honeyed. "Why don't you tell us what you and Kesha did yesterday?" Emma beamed. "We made a fort in the library and read my favorite book." Amanda's laugh was delicate but dripping with sugar-coated disdain. "A fort? In the library? My dear, that's cute. But don't you think the library is for more serious things?" Emma's smile faltered, just a little. "Kesha lets me read whatever I want," she said, defensive. Christina leaned in, tilting her head sympathetically. "And that's sweet, darling. But sometimes people who mean well don't always know what's best for your education." Kesha felt the heat rise in her chest, but she kept her face perfectly calm. "Emma's reading level is 2 grades above her age," she said evenly. "Exposure to stories she loves keeps her engaged." Priscilla pounced on the opening. "Oh, engaged, certainly. But there's also boundaries. Which brings us to something that happened last night, David." David, who had been quietly sipping his coffee, looked up slowly. "Go on." Priscilla set a small fabric-covered box in the center of the table. She opened it with theatrical care. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet, Emma's late mother's bracelet. "Emma told us she couldn't find this for weeks," Priscilla said, eyes flicking toward Kesha. "And last night, we found it, in Kesha's room." The air shifted. Emma's little hands clenched into fists. "That's not true," she blurted. "Well, it wasn't." "It's okay, sweetheart," Kesha said softly, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. She looked at the bracelet, then at David. You've got cameras in every hallway, Mr. Blackwood. If anyone believes I took that bracelet, I suggest we watch the footage right now. Victoria laughed lightly, the sound like glass breaking. Do we really need to involve technology for such a simple matter? Yes, David said, his voice cutting clean through the room. We do. Minutes later, they were all in the study, eyes on the wall of screens. David hit play. The footage showed Rebecca just after midnight slipping into Emma's room. She hesitated at the jewelry box, then took something small in her hand. Another camera caught her entering the staff annex. She opened Keisha's door with a key, one David knew she shouldn't have, and placed the bracelet in a drawer. When the clip ended, the room was silent except for Emma's sudden, small voice. I told you Keisha didn't take it. Keisha knelt beside her, smiling gently. You don't ever have to prove to me that you trust me, baby girl. David's gaze swept the women, his eyes like steel. I've let you dig your own graves, he said quietly. Now I'm done letting you near my daughter. What the women didn't know was that this was just the first card David planned to play, and the next would destroy whatever was left of their polished facades. The next morning, the mansion was uncharacteristically still. No clinking of fine china, no carefully orchestrated greetings, just the weight of tension pressing on every gilded wall. David had called a formal gathering for noon in the grand salon, the kind of summons the 5 women assumed would finally crown one of them as Emma's new mother. They arrived in their finest, Victoria in a fitted ivory dress that screamed old money, Priscilla in power red, Christina shimmering in sapphire silk, Rebecca in understated beige, and Amanda in diamonds so bright they almost distracted from her smirk. But when they entered the salon, the first thing they saw was not David. It was a massive screen set up against the far wall. In front of it sat 3 guests they hadn't expected. Marcus Thompson, his expression unreadable, Diane Williams-Johnson wearing her CNN press badge, and Dr. Angela Morrison, holding a thick folder stamped confidential. Keisha was there too, standing off to the side with Emma's hand in hers. She looked calm, almost serene, but her eyes were sharper than the women had ever seen. David stepped forward, his voice steady but cold. Before we proceed, there are things you should all see and hear. The lights dimmed. The screen came alive with clips from the hidden cameras, whispers in the library, Victoria's voice. That woman shouldn't even be in the same room as us. Christina in the sitting room. Some are more appropriate for certain people. Rebecca over dinner. Emma needs to learn early about her social class. Then the teddy bear setup. The bracelet plant. The calculated smiles that melted into venom the moment they thought no one was watching. When the last clip faded, the silence was suffocating. That, David said, is what you really are. And I'm done pretending it's anything else. Priscilla was the first to find her voice. David, this is a gross invasion of privacy. Spare me, David cut in sharply. Marcus, tell them what you found. Marcus opened a folder and began to read, each fact landing like a blow. Victoria Ashworth, expelled from 2 charities for financial misconduct. Priscilla Montgomery, 3 pending lawsuits for workplace harassment and racial discrimination. Christina Hawthorne, medical license revoked in 2 states. Rebecca Sterling, IRS investigation for tax evasion. Amanda Chase, facing 3 civil suits for creating a racially hostile work environment. Diane spoke next, her tone crisp and unflinching. These are all public records. By this evening, they will be broadcast to a national audience. Dr. Morrison stepped forward, placing her folder on the table. My evaluation of Emma shows clear evidence of emotional harm caused by attempts to sever her healthy attachment to Keisha Williams, a woman with degrees in education and child development, and an unblemished record of service. David turned to Emma. Sweetheart, you've lived with these women for weeks. You've seen how they treat you, and Keisha. I want to hear your choice, right here in front of them. Emma didn't hesitate. She squeezed Keisha's hand and said with all the certainty in her small voice, I want Keisha to be my mom. The room erupted, Victoria's face drained of color, Amanda's lips trembled in shock, Priscilla's mouth opened and closed like she'd lost her script. David didn't wait for them to recover. He walked to Keisha, took her free hand, and looked at her with something raw and unguarded in his eyes. "Keisha Williams, will you marry me?" Emma gasped, then grinned so wide it was almost laughter. And for the first time since the 5 women had arrived, Keisha allowed herself to smile. Not the polite, guarded curve of lips they were used to, but a smile of pure, unshaken truth. By the time the sun dipped below the Atlanta skyline that evening, the Blackwood mansion was no longer just an address, it was a headline. Diane's story broke first on CNN's Prime Hour, framed under a brutal title. Millionaire's marriage contest exposes elite racism and abuse. Child's choice ends in scandal. Clips from the hidden camera footage played nationwide. The teddy bear setup, the bracelet plant, the cold, cutting remarks about knowing your place. Social media ignited within minutes. Hashtags like #Justice for Keisha and #Emma chose right, trending in multiple countries. Inside the mansion, the 5 women scrambled like animals, sensing a trap closing in. Victoria was on the phone, her voice climbing into desperation. "Mother, you have to call the board. Tell them the footage is doctored." She stopped when she realized every word she spoke might already be recorded. Priscilla stalked out toward the driveway, only to be greeted by a wall of flashing cameras. "Ms. Montgomery, did you really call the maid an inappropriate influence for a child?" a reporter shouted. "What about the lawsuits?" Christina tried to slip away through the garden, but a mic caught her mid-step. "Do you regret plotting to have Ms. Williams fired?" Her answer, silence, was broadcast before she'd even reached her car. Rebecca's phone was already ringing with her accountant's voice, cold and clipped. "The IRS just called." Amanda's hotel PR director sent a single text. "Effective immediately, you're no longer authorized to represent the brand." Meanwhile, in the grand salon, David and Keisha sat together on the couch. Emma was curled against Keisha's side, still in her little party dress, her eyes heavy, but her smile wide. "You okay, baby girl?" Keisha asked softly. Emma nodded. "They can't make you leave now, right?" "No, sweetheart," David answered. "No one is ever taking her from you." Women were escorted out. No fanfare, no polite goodbyes. The moment the heavy front doors closed behind them, the air in the mansion changed. It felt lighter, quieter, safe. 2 days later, David and Keisha stood in the same garden where Emma had once taught Keisha hopscotch. This time there was an arch of flowers, a small group of close friends, Diane holding a camera, and Dr. Morrison as a witness. When David said, "I do," there was no hesitation. When Keisha said it back, there was no tremor. And when Emma wrapped her arms around them both, there were tears in every eye. The news cycles kept chewing on the scandal for weeks. Careers crumbled, reputations dissolved, invitations vanished for the 5 women who had once floated above consequences. But for David, Keisha, and Emma, the noise faded into the background of a life they were building together. A year later, in that same garden, Emma played the piano for her baby brother, while Keisha read scholarship applications for the foundation she now ran. David watched from the porch, his coffee cooling in his hands, marveling at how peace could grow in the very place war once tried to root itself. Sometimes victory wasn't loud. Sometimes it was just living well enough that the world could see you were never the one who needed to change. And for Keisha Williams, now Keisha Blackwood, that was more than enough.